Hello, and welcome to the Academic Center for Writing presentation on fallacies. This presentation was written and narrated by Jason Schneider, writing specialist in the ACW. Reasoning is how a problem, issue, or topic can be argued. In other words, reasoning has to do with thinking inductively or deductively to making and supporting a claim. But fallacies occur when there are failures of reasoning and thinking. These types of fallacies stem from irrelevant support to a claim, inadequate support for a claim, and mistaken assumptions toward a claim. In no way will the fallacies presented be exhaustive, but hopefully the fallacies given will provide a necessary understanding to reasoning when writing critically. Fallacies of relevance are evasions from articulating and arguing a claim with consistency, that is, unity and coherence. Moreover, fallacies of relevance concern irrelevant supporting arguments and evidence toward claims. An appeal to ignorance is a fallacy because the lack of solely ever having been shown, demonstrated, or proven does not constitute support for a claim. Some authors in the past had cited Huxley as an authority to support that claim that nearsightedness could be corrected by doing certain exercises regarding movement and rolling of the eye. However, Huxley had no expertise giving medical advice to correct vision, even though he was a popular writer of such novels such as A Brave New World. This term is also known as an unreliable testimonial. Even though a person has fame, this doesn't mean they have authority on a particular subject or issue. An appeal to general belief is called the bandwagon fallacy. It appeals to people's desire to be included among some group with particular beliefs and values. This is similar to ad populum and overlaps some, but ad populum differs in that the fallacy appeals to people and their emotions, not a wish to be identified among a group. This is a form of evasion from making a supported argument. Ad populum is an appeal to people and their general values. The problem is that this does not address the argument and should be seen as a form of evasion. Essentially, a gambler's fallacy is an assertion based on irrelevant evidence or illegitimate assumptions. This fallacy asserts speculations and rests solely on what-ifs, or only if something were or happened reasoning, without any evidence or possibility of testing whether true. In the example, all men is misconstrued as the biological sex of a person in the second sentence. However, it is interpreted as human beings, not the identification of sex, in the first sentence. Both the identification of sex and species, such as humans, are not treated as distinct words because the meanings are treated as interchangeable. This fallacy equates two dissimilar variables. For example, something that we'll call X is of some quality, whether it's good or bad, or some other equivocation because it is like something else that we'll call why. This can be called a false analogy too. This is a fallacy that evades providing supporting evidence, even though irrelevant evidence is provided. Non sequitur is Latin for it does not follow. Typically, a red herring is a deliberate attempt to evade and divert the argument to the problem. As in the example, criminals and rapists are dangerous as the speaker of the example says. But that is another issue, not an issue about reckless driving. The issue the speaker should answer is whether the speaker drove recklessly and paid the fine. Interestingly, this term was coined from the practice of using a stinky fish to divert dogs' sense of smell on a trail when tracking something or someone. Though may be relevant, these fallacies inadequately support claims. The problem with a false cause fallacy is that it confuses correlation, causation, and coincidence. The Latin phrase post hoc literally means after this, therefore because of this, which the first event begets the second event, and this is not always the case. A hasty generalization makes claims without evidence to support it. These fallacies invoke illegitimate assumptions in supporting claims. This fallacy ignores the spectrum of alternatives and answers. Thus, this fallacy pretends to be exhaustive when it is not. This fallacy is complex because it is both a statement and a question. It obfuscates a simple question and twists sentences into questions that mislead a person to incorrect assumptions. The second example asks a question in an accusing manner that gas stations are corrupt and are engaged in unethical activities when the issue might have only been about the high prices of gas, and fuses an additional question: are gas stations really corrupt? Rather than just asking, why can't we lower the price of gas that gas stations are charging, without introducing the second assumption that gas stations are corrupt. This is similar to the first example in that the question forces an illegitimate assumption about the person being asked, as if they are already guilty of spousal abuse, rather than just asking, do you beat your wife? Without the accusing manner in the question. Begging the question is circular in reasoning because the premise supports the conclusion while the conclusion returns to support the premise, thus stuck in a circular loop in reasoning. For example, this is like saying A happens, or A is what it is because B happens, or because B is what it is, and B happens, or B is what it is because C happens, or because C is what it is. Lastly, C happens, or C is what it is because A happens, or because A is what it is. Therefore, the reasoning has returned from where it began. A slippery slope is like a non sequitur fallacy, but a slippery slope does this in degrees that further along the way veers away and doesn't support an argument. Furthermore, a slippery slope asserts a prediction without evidence by arguing that a single step will initiate an inexorable series of events. This fallacy assumes that two or more things are alike in other respects because these things share a likeness in one respect, which does not prove a point but merely illustrate it. Furthermore, this fallacy might ignore small or insignificant differences that do not make two or more things distinct, or vice versa. Here's an example of one end of a slippery slope that we might look at. A slippery slope can occur in the instance against a side. Conversely, a slippery slope may occur in an instance for a side. Either way, the fallacy of a slippery slope can occur on either side of an argument, not for whether one is right or wrong, but how it is argued. Though some of these fallacies can occur in a non-dialectical manner, these fallacies have to do with responding to criticism and criticizing an argument. An ad hominem is a form of evasion and does not argue for or against a claim, but detours from the argument. The person arguing a claim is not the argument, so there should be no need to criticize the person to refute their claim, because a claim has no bearing on characteristics of the person asserting an argument. These responses are a form of ad hominem, but in response to a claim. The poo-poo fallacy is essentially a way of dismissing someone else's argument for a serious examination and fair evaluation. This fallacy ridicules an argument rather than assert anything based on the argument's substance. This fallacy, that is a misuse of humor, mocks and distracts with humor to undermine a claim, but doesn't critically argue against it. This is an inaccurate definition of the theory that glosses and oversimplifies what theory really asserts and attempts to explain, and no scientist would take this definition seriously. Speaking of the theory of evolution. Loaded words apply judgments in of themselves about a subject without justifying their use. Loaded words carry connotations to divest from the true logic of the argument. This is similar and overlaps with loaded questions, but loaded words assert criticism in a statement rather than just presenting illegitimate assumptions in a question, even though the overlap is almost the same. Counter-arguments and criticism should be addressed directly, lest the claim must be withdrawn in concession or modified. Fallacies of defense attempt to avoid criticism and its consequences. The term pornography is redefined as such only if it demeans women. So if a medium does not demean women, then it is redefined as not pornography. However, this may not be true in all cases of pornography, and case in point, this can be argued in saying all dimes are coins, but not all coins are dimes. The person defending a claim and responding to a counterexample might confuse the meaning of prove and assume that they can disregard and dismiss a counterargument. Though all fallacies in some way misuse language, fallacies that misuse language specifically falsify an argument in using misleading words. Fallacies that misuse evidence abuse and distort evidence. Others that draw faulty conclusions from evidence divert from logic, from assumptions, or faulty reasoning. Moreover, fallacies that sabotage arguments refute them by twisting the arguments into something they really aren't. Worse are fallacies that reject arguments by distorting the logic itself. Thanks for watching. For questions about this or any other writing topic, come and visit the Academic Center for Writing in room W114. Thanks again.